Maya Bale, huh? Can't figure it out. Okay, very happy that we successfully concluded our negotiations with Houston Organization of Public Employees. So we have now a multi-year contract with police and a multi-year contract with our civilian union once again, and I fully thank them for this. The civilian union has worked with us to peg out-year pay raises to the state of the economy. They recognize that there's some uncertainty there, and I appreciate them working on that. We also are very happy that we're raising our minimum wage to $12, and in fact, most of our employees will be above that because of longevity pay and other pay grade adjustments. But we also structured the pay raise where the bulk of the money was at the lower pay grades, so we need to raise the floor without shifting everybody at the top up quite as much. And so we put the money where we think people really need it. It is, in fact, essentially the same pay offer that we had back in June. Really didn't change, but we had an opportunity to go through the budget. Actually, more this pay offer goes farther back than that. We put it on hold for a little while we tried to negotiate with the firefighters. Couldn't conclude that. Had to get through the budget process, and then we quickly brought it home. And I really thank Hope for engaging and coming up with a good contract.
Mayor, there appears to have been a concerted effort from the Antihero folks to put sort of a slew of candidates on the ballot at the last minute in district races where there were council members who voted in favor of Hero. You have Pastor Willie Davis, you have Kendall Baker. What do you make of that effort? Does that concern you?
We know if it was a coordinated effort, it wasn't very successful. I mean, Councilmember Green was an outspoken advocate for the ordinance, and he's running unopposed. So maybe the fact that Heroes on the ballot inspired some of these folks, but I mean, you mentioned Kendall Baker. Kendall Baker was fired from the city of Houston for sexually harassing women under his supervision. I don't know that the anti-hero folks are going to want to align themselves with that caliber of candidate.
Two things related to the pay increase. One, two council members, including Mr. Costello, were concerned about possible, economic downturns having an impact on both the pension fund and the employee pay levels.
We had the same conversation when we passed the police contract back in February, and there's no question that there's concerns going forward as to where recurring revenue and recurring expenses line up. Mm-hmm. I'll point out something that Councilmember Costello well knows, and that is that we give the most conservative estimate we possibly can. We underestimate revenues and we overestimate expenses, so we have a big gap. So they know the worst case scenario, and then we bring it together. We're already, we were at a gap, $140 million gap some months ago, but as again, I thought the council member knew, we've already narrowed that gap as we close the books for 2015, and I think we're under $100 million now, but it's still a big gap, and we're going to continue to work to close that gap. We're watching our revenue very closely. I mean, obviously we're concerned at the lingering low oil price impact, and while our economy has continued to expand, it's slowed significantly, and so we're going to watch that. But what it ultimately comes down to, and I think every council member in here had said some version of this, even the council member that voted against it, the contract is that we have to pay our people. We're a service organization. We depend on human beings to do the work, and we need to pay our people a living wage. That is only fair, but we also need to pay a wage that allows us to keep our workforce. in addition to this across the board, it wasn't across the board pay raise, it was an across the board pay raise, but with different pay categories, changing different amounts. We have been very strategic over the last few years in finding categories within our workforce where we start getting way out of whack with the market and raising them. Case in point is plan checkers in our permitting division, and for a while we raised the salaries and we were recruiting nationwide. So we don't just depend on these types of adjustments. We also do targeted adjustments to keep everybody at market, because we have to have the people. And it's very evident when certain key services or core services the city provides, is if we start losing people, we have to adjust on the fly, and we do that.
Leah, what do you think about the discussion on the ballot language today?
You know, it was an interesting discussion, and this was one where I think everybody, obviously it was a unanimous decision to send it forward. The question was, do you try to be generic and say certain characteristics or special characteristics, or do you list out the characteristics that are protected in the interests of transparency? And clearly, council finally came down on doing it, just listing everything out. I would challenge the average listener or reader to say, if you use a phrase like protect certain or special characteristics, to name what they think that means. And I think the more specificity, the better in this case. It was just too generic. But there was actually a civil discussion of that particular language for the most part.
Dave Wilson keeps coming back. You just filed a response to his lawsuit to get a writ of mandamus. How do you rate the chances of this making it to the ballot?
I have no idea. The Supreme Court has surprised me several times lately in their sensitivity to political issues here in Houston, rather than what I think is the clear letter of the law. But Mr. Wilson's case is something where we have already litigated in another circumstance whether you can use a charter amendment, and he clearly says his petition is a charter amendment, to undo an ordinance. He now is trying to say that it has nothing to do with the HERO ordinance, but in fact, the only place in our ordinances that we use the phrase gender identity, to my knowledge, is in the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance. So we think he's trying to get a second bite at the apple. It's already on the ballot. We're already going to the voters. He is using an illegal method to try to make something happen, and we're defending it, through the normal legal process. And he's on an appeal, I think, over in district court. Or I don't know where we are on that side, but he's trying to short circuit the process by going to the state Supreme Court.
Well, he always refers to the executive action from 2012 for city employees, because there's also gender identity defined in there. So.
And the next mayor can come in and issue a completely different executive order. But the executive order becomes moot if the ordinance passes.
We'll have one more question.
I mean, it becomes completely unnecessary because the ordinance is much broader and applies to the city as well as non-city operations.
Councilman Kubosh brought something to our attention that, and I must have not been at that council meeting, but that you were talking about a new policy that would require the city attorney to look over petitions before the city secretary.
The city attorney has always provided legal advice to all city departments. That's part of the job of the city attorney. And most petitions, there's a cursory examination of, is the form proper, were they submitted timely, and then the city secretary begins to count them. So it's actually wasn't a change in policy. In fact, that policy has always been there. But what I have clarified is that I want to be absolutely sure that that petition is a legal petition before the city secretary ever starts counting. Because it takes time and resources. Every time we get one of these petitions, Ms. Russell comes and says, how much overtime can I use to count them? We pull people from other departments to help with the counting process, particularly if there's a timeliness issue. So it only makes sense that if it's, why count it if it's not a legal petition? And so we just clarified that, that's, the city attorney's always been a part of the process. We just clarified that let's do it early enough so that we don't waste taxpayer dollars.
But didn't the Texas Supreme Court say that the city attorney should not have been involved?
Very good case in point is with the April 9th charter, the petitions that Dave Wilson filed. The city secretary received them. She had a concern. She called us. We said, there's no reason to count it. So that's what the mayor's addressing. There are certain situations where on their face, instruments are just facially invalid. And there's no reason to put time and resources in that.
And he
That's all
agreed.
she's talking.
Yeah, Dave Wilson actually agreed that first petition that he submitted, and the city attorney said, you didn't meet the minimum number of petitions, and he said, oops, my fault, and he went away. That's what we're trying to.
So I guess the key is just for the city attorney to first look at it and not the city secretary to count it first, and then, because that was the whole issue with the Supreme Court. No.
Yeah. I think it used to be kind of, well, the city secretary can count it. If they don't have enough signatures, we just invalidate it anyway. Now we're saying, let's do the legal side first and just not waste the resources and get that clear. And then the city secretary counts as the city secretary counts. Anything else? Okay.
Thank you.